Are you a network engineer who just been contacted by a recruiter from one of the companies below? Or maybe you're planning to apply for a job with them and want to make sure that you are the best prepared possible. If you fit in one of these categories, then you must watch this video. Okay, so let's say that you have received a notification such as an email or maybe a private message via LinkedIn from a recruiter expressing interest in you applying for an open position they have. The recruiter in that message is requesting you to share a time and day as well as contact information for them to set up a quick call with you. At this point, you are very excited about this opportunity and you believe that the right thing to do is to have the recruiter call you immediately, right? Well, that's wrong. First, you need to be patient and give yourself enough time to do some research about the company and getting familiar with the job requirements. So you give them a day that is at least 72 hours ahead of the present time. Of course, this will depend on how skilled you are and how well you know the company ahead of time. At this point, you have already agreed to have a call with the recruiter in say 3 days from now. You might be thinking this will be just a simple get to know you type of call, right? Well, it depends. The recruiter might just ask you a few questions about your current job and past experience of yours. Or maybe the recruiter will be ready to ask you some technical questions to make sure you possess the fundamental skills to move to the next step. Whatever the case might be, you need to be ready to answer questions on subjects such as the one listed below. I'll just break it down into two categories: soft skills and technical skills. So let's go with soft skills first. You need to be ready to share examples of a time that you had to deal with a conflict, be it a conflict with a teammate that had a difficult personality, or maybe a conflict of ideas. Maybe someone had a disagreement with you, or maybe you had a disagreement, for example, with your manager. Whatever the case might be, you need to make sure that whatever you share with them ends with a positive vibe. Technical skills, networking. I'm not gonna go into much details of networking. You are a network engineer. You need to have knowledge of the fundamentals of networking, how TCP operates, various routing protocols such as OSPF or ISIS, and of course, BGP. So you need to be ready to answer questions on those subjects, if you will. Programming, scripting. This will just go around automation. Basically here, you will be given a chance to choose a language like the one that you feel the most comfortable with. Whatever the language is you go for, you need to be ready to answer questions on a high level of things such as data structures, say streams, dictionaries, or array, or whatever the case might be for the language that you go for. Linux fundamentals. Yes, you will be asked questions on Linux on either this stage of the interviewing process or maybe on later phases of the interviewing process. But you need to have some understanding of how the Linux operating system works. For example, the recruiter might ask you, how would you go by viewing the routing table or the address resolution protocol table on a Linux machine? Or they might just ask you what a pipe is, for instance. So be ready for those type of questions. It's not going to be much in depth at this stage, but still you need to be ready to answer some basic questions again. If you do well enough on a recruiter call, they'll pretty much move you on to the next step. The next step will be based on a series of phone screening interviews with actual engineers, of course. So you need to be ready to answer questions or explain things in a more in-depth way. The topics that will be covered on those interviews will be coding, Linux, and networking. So for now, we're going to skip ahead networking. Hopefully you have a solid understanding of that area, if you will. In the case of coding, they will not be asking you simple things such as what a list is or what a list comprehension is. In the case of Python, if that is what you choose. They will be giving you a problem for you to be able to create a solution for in a timely manner. Once you create your solution, you need to be able to break it down in a way that you can explain in details what the advantages and disadvantages of your codes are. For example, what the time complexity is of your code or what the space complexity is of your code. If you're not familiar with those terms, please take some time to do some research on BIGO, notation, time complexity, space complexity, because that's going to help you and give you an edge on those interviews, if you will. Let's move on to Linux. In the case of the Linux interview, this can go from explaining how the Linux operating system boots up, like breaking down the booting process in details, all the way to just troubleshooting something based on a log file that they might hand to you. So what I'll suggest you to do is to try to do some research on the Linux fundamentals, such as the booting process, memory management on a high level. Try to understand what a system call is, and also try to understand what happens when you execute a command or a program on the bash. You need to know what system calls might take place, such as the fork system call, for example. So don't worry much about Linux. I'll make sure to leave you a link in the description below so you can grab a book that's going to give you all you need for the interviewing process when it comes to the Linux interview. Finally, if you did well enough on the previous interviews, you will be moved on to the final stage of the interviewing process, which will be the on-site interview, as you might have expected. This will be a very intense day for you, in which you will have between 5 and 6 45 to an hour interviews broken down into the competencies listed here. It's good to know that this interviewing process will be very similar to what we have already covered before. Of course, with the exception of having an interview with the hiring manager, having a lunch break with a potential teammate, and having an interview based on leadership principles or software design patterns. Let's take a moment and go back to the hiring manager interview. Here, you will be expected to share examples of a time you had to deal with a conflict, be it with a teammate or conflicts of ideas, like someone disagreed with you or you had a disagreement with your manager. Something very similar to what we touched on before. And aside from that, you need to be able to also share examples of a project that you have worked on, maybe a difficult project or a project that you might have failed on, and the learning curve of that situation, and more questions of that nature. You need to make sure to make a very good first impression to the hiring manager, since that will be pretty much the person you will report to should you get an offer. In the case of the lunch break, of course, if you get a chance to have one, will be with someone either from the same team that you are being interviewed for, or it could be some other team. Regardless of what the case might be, you need to make sure to make a lot of questions to this person. For example, how they operate within a team, what the interaction with the manager is like, what they think is great, and also what they think could be better. This is going to kind of give you a wider perspective what it will be like to work for this company, and that's going to help you determine whether or not this is the right place for you. So take advantage of that time. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the leadership principle or software design pattern interview. This one will depend on how the company operates, whether or not they do enforce their leadership principles like as a core value to their candidates or whatnot. And in the case that they do enforce those principles, they want you to understand them during the interviewing process, then that's what you should expect from this interview. There will be one or more people during that interview that will be pretty much asking you questions that you might have already seen before during the whole interviewing process. Things such as, tell me a time when you had to deal with a conflict. Tell me a time you had to deal with a difficult project or that you worked on a project that was not delivered on time. Explain a time that you had to collaborate with another team. Things of that nature again. Now, if you do not get this type of interview, but instead you get something like a software design pattern, they'll be pretty much assessing your software development skills when it comes to designing a highly distributed software, like a monitoring system to monitor the networking devices or whatnot. And what they want from you is to design something that's, first of all, simple, that doesn't have a lot of components that add up to the complexity of it, and something, of course, that you can iterate over on to make it better over time. That's pretty much what they need from you. So try not to make this a complicated system because that's not going to give you any points. Alright, so before we end the video, I left the most important thing for last. Guess what it is? Questions. You need to come prepared to every single interview with questions for you to ask your interviewer. Be it questions regarding what the challenges are that they are facing currently, or even asking to give you suggestions based on their experience on how you can be better across the rest of the interviewing process. Even if you do get an offer, you will want to have some advices from someone that's already working there for you to ensure that you are successful. Does that make any sense? Hopefully it does. Alright, so that is it for this video. I really hope you found this helpful. And all I ask for you, if you did find this helpful, is to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new to it. Also, please let me know of your experience during the interview in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.